So good morning to you, Yasmin, in for JVS this morning. And on the line, I've got Jonathan Davis, an economist and wealth advisor from Hertfordshire. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi, Yasmin.
Do you agree, are public sector workers really so badly paid?
Interesting, the tone of your voice. No, they're not badly paid at all. It's an absolute nonsense. They've been extremely well paid for the last 20 years. They should try working in the private sector, where pensions have been slashed over the last 20 years, and there have been pay restraints simply because the business has required pay restraints.
But where are we? I mean, it's hard to get your head around this, isn't it? Because you look at various sets of statistics and figures, and then you hear people like nurses and prison officers saying, look, our working conditions are terrible, we work really long hours, and we can't afford, some of them are leaving those professions, and they're people that we really need.
The work conditions is not what you asked me about. I don't doubt some jobs are very difficult. I don't doubt that at all. Again, try working in the private sector. But you know, everyone's talking about the salaries. You should take into account the fact that since 2008, taxes have been absolutely slashed. So therefore, the net pays has actually increased. And on top of that, separately but relevant, interest rates have been absolutely slashed. So mortgage borrowing costs have gone through the floor. Therefore, expenditures have plummeted. Actually, those in the public and to a slightly less but still degree, everyone's standard of living has risen in the last several years because of reduced taxes and lower borrowing costs.
Jonathan, a lot of people would say that they feel, despite what you've just said, that they feel that the money in their pocket is less than it was because expenditure is actually, the cost of living has gone up.
Well, the cost of living is, you're talking about the inflation rate. And the statisticians in cahoots with the politicians deliberately have kept the cost of housing, of accommodation, out of inflation. And the fact is, average mortgage rates in 2009 were 6%. They're now 2%. Thus, the cost of accommodation has fallen. Clearly, if you've been a renter, you haven't benefited, but you have, as I say, had reduced income taxes. Therefore, your net pay has gone up. I accept absolutely that the general cost of living has risen, and there's no question. People, millions of folk are living more or less hand to mouth. I mean, statistics show that millions have only about £100 a month at the end of the month. I get all that, but this question, this focused question on are public sector workers hard done by? No, they are not hard done by.
But you've just said yourself, I'm trying to get, to the nitty-gritty of what you're saying is that I get it, they're, it's hard, it's difficult conditions and all of that, but I don't think they're badly paid. Should we not be equating what someone does, whether it's labour-intensive, whether it's very difficult work, whatever the working conditions may be, shouldn't we be rewarding that with better pay?
Well, that is, of course, a moral question that the politicians must decide. My own view on that comes from the question, are they badly paid? Public sector workers are not badly paid. I reject absolutely. As I say, when I compare how much is going into public sector pensions compared to similar folk in the private sector, I mean, it's an absolute joke. 5 times as much is going into public sector pensions. And, people should get the reality that a pension is part of overall remuneration, and there's no question the public sector are in a massively good deal compared to the private sector. Then salaries and benefits themselves in the public sector If you go long-term sick, you get early pension, you get sick pay, you get probably more holidays than you do in the private sector.
Okay, so to your
salaries
mind,
are commensurate or better than the private sector.
I hear you, Jonathan. If you don't mind, I might bring in another opinion to hear. We've got Glyn Travis, who is the Assistant General Secretary of the Prison Officers Association, on the line. Hello, Glyn.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
I'm really sorry because I thought I'd gone into a time warp, and I thought I'd gone back to the 18th century. We were talking about chimney sweeps and the way that people are. People who have worked within the public sector have worked and strove to improve terms and conditions, to improve the welfare and life of individuals. And we should not be castigating individuals because they pay and they get benefits and they get sick pay. The government in the last 7 years have attacked the benefit, the sick pay, and all of the issues. They've made prison officers and public sector workers contribute toward their pensions, which they never had to. And when Jonathan says the pay is better, I'm sorry, for an economist, I just do not understand where he gets that from. We've got thousands and thousands of public sector workers who are reliant on food banks. We've got thousands and thousands of public sector workers who cannot get onto the property ladder. Yeah, they are living in rented accommodation, their morals and their lives. But the reality is this: in real terms, for people who live, don't have to work until they're 68 to get their pension if they ever survive that. Right? Where we are today is the fact that the government has driven the austerity measures because individuals at the top end of the pay scale, the bankers and the financial fat cats, have actually crippled the country, and workers are having to pay for that. And what we need is a government to understand that the pay and terms and conditions of workers, irrespective of where they work, whether they're a private company or public, should be fair, commensurate to the work that they do, and allow them to live a modern standard of living and not go back, as Jonathan seems to be suggesting there, to the 18th century where we've got people going up chimneys.
I'm going to go back to Jonathan in a moment, but Glyn, first of all, can you tell me, for your members, for the average prison officer, what are they taking home?
The average prison officer takes home now around £1,700 a month for the basic salary for what they get.
Okay, and we've heard a lot, obviously, about issues within the sector and about retention. What is it like?
Well, what people have got to remember is for the salary that a prison officer does, they work every other weekend. They work nights. They work shifts that start at 6:30 in the morning and sometimes don't finish at night till 9 o'clock at night. Therefore, they've got a travelling time to and from work. The average their average normal working day is about 11 hours a day. Right? When they go to work, they're working in conditions that are the most difficult, challenging and dangerous in society at the present time. Yesterday, we had 17 prison staff assaulted. Over 40 prisoners assaulted other prisoners. We had 2 deaths. We've got suicides at rocket high levels, right? All what we're doing is warehousing offenders, and we're in an environment that is so stressful, right? Now, if Jonathan, as an economist, thinks that is we're overpaid, right, I think he needs to get into the real world about what real work is. And the issue there is our firefighters who dealt with Grenfell and the horrors that they deal with, our police who deal with the crime on streets every single day, our nurses and people in A&E who go and face the challenges of caring for our older people and helping people and dealing with those, whether they come from England or from abroad, whether they're a migrant or not. All what we're saying is that the government cannot continue to attack workers. They should be looking at fair pay, just pay, right, and give people the right to live normal and good standards of living.
Glyn, thank you. I'm going to bring Jonathan back in to respond to that. Jonathan Davies.
I've rarely heard so many red herrings about a central question in any debate. The central question is, are public sector workers less well off than they were? The answer is no. They are better off than they were.
But Jonathan, we're just hearing. If people are better off than they were, we just heard what Glyn said about some of his members having to use food banks. That should not be the situation we're in 2017 in the UK.
Well, I couldn't agree more. The reality is, however, there is far too much anecdotal evidence that food banks are a political construct these days. You go along to the GP, you say you haven't got food, they immediately send you to the food bank, whether you're a millionaire or not. So,
I don't think we're sending any millionaires to food banks, are we, Jonathan? Come on.
If you talk about red herring, sorry, Yasmin, to interrupt that. Jonathan, I don't know where you got your economic data to say that people are more well off now than where they were in 2010, when you've had a pay freeze for 2 years and a pay cap of 1% for public sector workers, and inflation has been rising above that. Right? Inflation is based on all of the factors that you've got. So I'd like to see your data, your raw data, that demonstrates that people are better off, because workers are certainly not better off. Not the people at the grass floor, the frontline staff of operation on public services are not better off.
Yasmin, I don't know if anyone heard, but the fundamental data, as you say, is that taxes have been slashed and mortgage costs have slashed. So that's the reality. I'm not questioning that life is tough. Life is very tough. The causes of inequality come from central banking and politicians, but the answer is not for everyone's pay to raise, because what that does, and this is what your listeners need to get, if you simply raise everyone's pay, which is actually what they are doing it and they will create inflation. More inflation, sustained rise in the cost of living. Ultimately, this is what trades unionists never get. The solution is to reduce the costs of living, not to increase pay.
Jonathan, thank you. Glyn, I'll let you come back on that. Glyn Travis.
Well, the reality is that when you get your wage package every week or every month, right, a family has a certain amount of money to live off, right? Your disposable income has dropped week by week, year by year over the last 7 years. And whether Jonathan believes that lowering tax and taking national insurance and VAT, right, and all of those issues and reducing all of those costs makes life better, great. But the reality is that doesn't happen for the people around the streets. People have still got to go to shops and buy food and sustainables, domestics and well-being things. You've got to be able to put your children in school and clothe them and all of those things. The reality is that if you earn £1,000 and it costs you £1,100, people are getting in debt week after week after week, and trade unions fight to ensure that workers go to work, get treated with respect by the employer, get a fair pay for a fair day's living, and hope that they can live above the breadline, not with millionaire lifestyles, but just above the breadline, so they don't need to go to the food bank. And I agree with you. I've never seen a millionaire queuing up at a food bank, but what I have seen is prison officers, nurses, right, fire brigade, and policemen queuing up at food banks because they cannot sustain their family lives on the income that they earn. And that's a reality of where we are in 2017. And the Tory government should hold their head in shame.
Glyn, thank you for talking to us before.